Welcome back, everybody. Today we're diving into something pretty controversial,
Yeah.
the potential closure of the U.S. Department of Education.
Mm.
Big topic, right?
Right.
We're going to try to break down why people are even talking about this, what it could mean for things like research funding, all
Right?
the important stuff, and how it could affect all of us.
Yeah, that's key, right? Because
Yeah.
this isn't just theoretical. It's
I would agree.
it's going to have real impacts
Exactly.
on students, teachers,
Real world stuff.
all of us.
And to help us understand all of this, we've got insights from two different AI models,
Interesting.
Grok and ChatGPT.
Okay.
And they both answered questions about this whole issue.
Uh-huh.
But what's really cool is they highlight different aspects of the problem.
I see. So like different perspectives.
Exactly. So we get, like a well-rounded picture.
That's what makes it so fascinating, right? Because we're not just looking at the facts.
Right.
We're looking at how those facts are kind of spun, how they're, presented to support different agendas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's get right into it.
Okay.
Why is there even talk of closing the Department of Education in the first place?
Right. Like what's the motivation?
Well, Grok points to decentralization as like a key driver.
Decentralization. Okay.
Yeah, the idea that states could maybe do a better job if they had more control,
Interesting.
tailoring education to their own specific needs.
Okay.
So think about your own state for a second.
Okay. Yeah.
What are some of the unique challenges and opportunities it faces when it comes to education?
That's a good question. Yeah, because every state's different, right?
Oh, yeah.
They've got
Different populations, different needs.
absolutely different resources, different
Priority.
priorities, exactly.
And ChatGPT adds another layer here, and it's a pretty politically charged one.
Oh, okay. Let's hear it.
They focus on eliminating what they call radical agendas from education.
Radical agendas, huh?
Yeah.
That's loaded language right there.
Yeah. It definitely tells us this isn't just about like efficiency
Right.
or just giving states more control.
Yeah.
It's about ideology too.
It makes you wonder, what even is a radical agenda in education? Like, who gets to decide that?
Exactly. And whose definition are we using?
It's a big question, yeah.
It is.
Especially when you think about what it could mean for research funding.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Which both sources say is like a major sticking point.
Okay, so let's talk about that then.
Yeah, let's get into the money.
Because I think a lot of people, when they hear about closing the department, they're like, wait a minute,
Right.
what happens to all the research grants?
Yeah, because the department manages a ton of money, right? That goes towards research all over the country.
Exactly. So what happens to all that?
Yeah, right.
Does it just disappear?
Well, both sources kind of suggest that existing grants would probably continue for now.
Okay, so no immediate halt to everything?
Probably not, but
Oh,
there would
man.
definitely be a lot of confusion, and probably delays as things get sorted out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, the bigger question is what happens long term,
Wrong.
Like who takes over funding education research down the line?
Right, because someone has to, right?
Exactly. Grok suggests states could step up, which brings us back to that local control idea.
Okay, but wouldn't some states maybe not prioritize research as much as others?
That's the worry, right?
Yeah.
And think about it. Some states might focus on different areas of research,
Oh, for sure.
just on their own, agendas.
So you could have like a patchwork of research happening all over.
Exactly. And that's where you get into this question of disparity.
Right, because then it's like, are we creating a system where some states are getting left behind?
Potentially. Yeah, think about it. A rural school district
Right.
in a state with, not a lot of funding.
Yeah.
How are they going to compete for research dollars against like wealthier districts?
Or states with totally different priorities.
Exactly.
It's kind of scary to think about, honestly.
It is.
And then what happens to all that research that looks at like national trends?
Oh, good point.
Like those big studies that track student performance.
Yeah.
Well, graduation rates across the whole country.
Right. Would that even be possible
Would it?
if each state's doing its own thing?
Yeah, how do you get that big picture anymore?
Hard to say.
Yeah.
ChatGPT suggests that maybe other federal agencies
Okay.
could take over some of that responsibility.
Like which ones?
They specifically mention the Institute of Education Sciences, IES.
IES, okay.
Yeah. They fund a ton of research.
So what happens to them would be a big deal.
Huge. Yeah, like a real indicator of how this whole thing might play out.
So there's just so much uncertainty around the whole research funding thing.
A lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
Really makes you wonder.
What happens to innovation,
Yeah.
Like one of the arguments for closing the department is that it would free up states
Right.
to be more innovative.
And responsive to like their local needs.
Right.
But what if that innovation comes at the cost of equity? You know what I mean?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's like, are we just trading one set of problems for another?
Exactly, yeah.
Groke brings up something interesting here.
Okay.
They connect this push to close the department back to Ronald Reagan.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, remember he campaigned on abolishing it back in the 80s?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So this isn't a brand new idea.
Right.
It's been around for a while.
Yeah.
It's been simmering in conservative circles for decades, actually.
That's interesting.
It is.
Yeah, it makes sense, though.
It speaks to this, like, deep-seated belief
Yeah.
that the federal government has just become too involved in education.
Mm-hmm.
And Broke specifically says that for people like Trump and Musk,
Mm-hmm.
this is part of a bigger goal
Okay.
to shrink the federal government's role
Okay.
in a lot of areas.
Right, so it's not just education.
Not just education, no.
It's a whole philosophy.
Exactly. They see it as a way to promote more local control, right?
Right.
And like you said, maybe more innovation.
But again, it's like innovation for whom?
Yeah.
You know, if research funding is left up to each individual state, are we going to see a bigger gap between the states that have the resources to invest
Right.
and the ones that don't?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
That's like those maps that show how different states fund education differently.
Oh, yeah.
You can already see this, like, patchwork of approaches across the country.
Yeah, for sure.
So if we take away that federal role,
Right.
do those differences just become even more extreme?
It's definitely a possibility, yeah.
And then there's the whole question of private funding,
Oh, right. Yeah.
which both Groke and ChatGPT bring up.
Yeah.
If the department closes,
Yeah.
will private companies and foundations step in?
Interesting question.
Will they fill that void?
And if they do, right.
Yeah.
What does that mean for, like, the direction of research? You know, will the focus shift to areas that are more profitable?
Or align with certain corporate interests?
Exactly.
It's a little unsettling to think about.
It is.
It's like, what are we prioritizing then?
Yeah, we've seen this happen in other fields, right?
Oh, totally.
Where corporate-funded research has
Right.
sometimes led to biased findings.
Or a focus on profit over the public good.
Exactly. It's definitely something to keep in mind.
It's almost like we need to ask ourselves, what kind of education system do we even want?
Right.
Like
right.
one driven by national standards and a commitment to equity,
Yeah.
or one that's more fragmented and influenced by, private interests.
Mm-hmm.
Feels like a pretty big choice.
It is a big choice, yeah. I mean, those are really the options we're facing.
Right.
Even if they're not always presented that clearly.
It's almost like they're hidden beneath the surface,
Right, exactly. It's
Yeah.
like reading between the lines.
which brings us back to like the actual legal and political realities
But, yeah.
of actually shutting down the Department of Education.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as just like snapping your fingers.
No, not all.
Right.
Both of our sources agree that it would need congressional approval,
Oh, for sure.
which, given how divided things are right now,
Yeah, it's not looking good.
could be a tough road.
An uphill battle for sure.
Yeah, and Groke even mentions that some people who want to close the department are talking about using executive orders.
To try to bypass Congress?
Yeah, basically to get the ball rolling.
Wow.
But even if that happens, it'll probably face legal challenges.
Oh, yeah.
Spark a lot of debate.
I can't even imagine Twitter if that happened.
Oh, it would be wild.
Wild.
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing debates like this play out online, right?
Oh, yeah.
People are passionate about education,
They are.
and they have strong opinions on both sides.
And they're not afraid to share them.
No, not at all.
It's one of those topics that really hits home for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've all been through the education system in some way.
Right.
So we all have our own experiences and opinions.
Which is why I think it's so important to have these conversations.
Oh, for sure.
To hear those different perspectives.
Yeah,
And really think about the consequences of making such a big change.
absolutely.
Speaking of consequences, we haven't even talked much about the potential impact on national standards.
Oh, right. That's huge.
Like
yeah.
if each state is setting its own curriculum
Yeah.
and funding its own research.
What happens to the idea of a national standard?
Exactly.
That's a question neither of our sources really addressed directly.
They didn't.
But it's a crucial one.
It is.
Well, we see like a race to the bottom,
Oh, gosh.
where states are competing to lower standards just to attract businesses or cut costs.
Or will some states actually step up and become leaders,
Right.
in educational innovation?
It's hard to say,
It really is.
but it's definitely something we need to think about,
Yep.
because if we lose that national framework, it could have a huge impact on college admissions, workforce readiness, even our national identity.
Oh, yeah.
It's fascinating to think about,
It is.
how something as bureaucratic as the Department of Education
Right.
can be so connected to these bigger questions.
Yeah, like who are we as a nation?
Exactly.
What do we value?
Right.
It makes you realize that this isn't just some theoretical debate.
No, not at all.
It's about real people
Yeah,
and, the kind of future we're setting up for kids, for the next generation.
it is. It is.
And one thing that just keeps coming up for me is this whole issue of equity.
Right, yeah.
We've talked about the potential for things to get even more unequal between states.
Yeah.
If we keep pushing for more decentralization,
It's a real concern.
what happens to students who move from one state to another?
Yeah, oh, good point.
Will their credits even transfer?
Yeah, exactly.
Will they have the same opportunity?
Yeah. It's like, will they be prepared for the same things?
Right. It raises a ton of questions.
Yeah, a lot of logistical stuff,
Logistical for sure.
but also deeper questions, right?
Oh, yeah.
About fairness, about opportunity.
Yeah, if every state has such different resources,
Right, and different standards.
are we really giving all students a fair shot?
That's the question, isn't it?
It's something I keep coming back to
It's a big one.
because the American education system has always been about upward mobility,
Yeah,
right?
that's the promise.
That no matter where you start, you have a chance to succeed.
Right.
But what happens if that promise starts to disappear?
That's a good question. What does that mean for us?
For all of us, yeah.
It's a bit unsettling to think about.
It really underscores why we need to be having these conversations,
Yeah, for sure.
to really think through the potential downsides of closing the department.
Absolutely. We can't just focus on the positives.
Right.
We have to look at the whole picture.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's been so helpful to have this deep dive today,
Yeah, it's been really illuminating.
to unpack the different arguments,
All the different perspectives.
the legal stuff, the political stuff, the funding stuff,
And equity stuff.
the equity. Yeah, those big questions about national standards.
It's a lot to consider.
It is, but I think it's given our listeners a much better understanding of all this.
I hope so, because it's complicated. Right?
It's not an easy decision.
No. There are trade-offs no matter what we do.
And ultimately, it's a decision that'll be made by our elected officials.
Right.
But the more we understand,
Yeah.
the better equipped we are to hold them accountable.
And advocate for what we believe in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to wrap things up, I want to leave everyone with one final thought.
Okay, sure.
We talked about private funding potentially filling the gap if the department closes. We talked about the potential problems with that.
Yeah.
But what if there was another way?
Oh.
What if instead of relying on private companies or leaving states to just figure it out on their own,
Yeah.
we explored something more collaborative?
Interesting.
What if states pooled their resources
Okay.
and created like an interstate organization
Right.
to fund and manage education research?
So, like, a national organization, but run by the states.
Exactly.
Interesting.
It could combine local control with some stability.
Right. You'd still have that consistency.
Yeah, it's not a perfect solution, of course,
No solution is.
but it's an example of the kind of creative thinking we need right now.
I agree.
We need to challenge those assumptions,
Yeah.
explore new possibilities, and ultimately fight for an education system that works for everyone,
Absolutely. That's the goal.
no matter where they live or what their background is.
Because education is the foundation
It is.
of a just and equitable society.
And the decisions we make today will have consequences for years to come.
No doubt about it.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Keep those brains buzzing, and we'll catch you next time.